to today's video lecture, and in today's video lecture I'll be solving previous year's NEET questions and discussing the answers. And as you can see on your screen, this is for the chapter Neural Control and Coordination, and this is part 1 of the series. Okay, we are in part 1. So let's begin. Okay, so question number 1. In a man, abducens nerve is injured. Which one of the following functions will be affected? And this appeared in 2005. Let me just change this. Yeah. So you have your 4 options here. So let's go through the options. A, movement of the eyeball. B, movement of the tongue. C, swallowing. And D, movement of the neck. So if abducens nerve is injured, which one of the following functions will be affected? Remember to please read the question properly. Okay, so according to this, it is A. Okay, so if you got the answer A, that means you got the right answer. So movement of the eyeball will be affected. That is the, yeah, sometimes my pen goes a bit crazy. So movement of the eyeball is the right answer. Let's go to the discussion. Okay, so now before I talk about abducens, what I've done is I've made a table with all the cranial nerves. Okay, the number and the corresponding name, what type of nerve it is, whether it's sensory, it's motor, or it's mixed, and what is the action. Okay, that means what are the functions of the nerve. Okay, so if you like, you can note it down. So the first one is olfactory. You have to remember this in order. Okay, it's not that I have put my own serial numbers. It's not like that. Medically, this is how it is denoted. Okay, every nerve has a particular number associated with it. Okay, so these are not random serial numbers. So the first nerve is olfactory. Okay, remember the cranial nerves. We're talking about cranial nerves here. Okay, abducens was a cranial nerve. Okay, and there are 12 pairs. Okay, they are in pairs. Okay, in humans. Alright, so the first one is olfactory and it's a sensory nerve. Alright, and this is the function, carries impulses of smell, okay, from nasal mucosa. Second is optic. Again, it is a sensory nerve. Sorry. Okay, it is a sensory nerve. Okay, visions from retina is the function. Third is oculomotor. So it is a motor nerve. This is the motor function of the nerve. This is the motor function. Don't worry about whether it's somatic or visceral. I've just written it down, but just remember, for NEET point of view, what you need to do is remember the name of the nerve, what number it is, 1, 2, 3, 4, so on, and whether it's a sensory or a motor nerve, and the action of the nerve. All right. So again, trochlear is the fourth nerve. It's again motor nerve. Don't worry whether it's somatic or visceral, and what it does. Okay. Trigeminal. Now trigeminal is the fifth nerve, and it is divided into 3 parts. Okay. So it is a mixed nerve. You have ophthalmic, which is a sensory nerve. You have maxillary division, which is again a sensory nerve, and you have mandibular, which is a motor nerve. So that means it is a mixed nerve. Now the reason why I am giving this information in the first question itself is because in the consequential questions you will come across you will have to recall this information. Okay, so that is why. So ophthalmic, sensation from cornea, skin of forehead, scalp, eyelids, nose and mucosa of nasal cavity and paranasal sinuses. Again, maxillary division is the sensory nerve, and sensation from skin of face over maxilla, including upper lip, maxillary teeth, mucosa of nose, maxillary sinuses and palate. Again, this is a motor part of the nerve. So when you have sensory and motor, it is called a mixed nerve. That means it is performing 2 functions. Okay, it is performing the sensory part of the function as well as the motor part of the function. So motor to muscles of mastication, a muscle located under the jaw, mylohyoid, soft palate, middle ear muscle. Okay. And this is the sensory part of it. Okay, again, sensation from the skin over mandible. Now this also comes under the mandibular division. Okay, so it's a motor as well as a sensory. Okay, sensation from the skin over mandible, including lower lip and side of head, mandibular teeth, mucosa of mouth, and anterior two-third of tongue. So what you can do is note it down in your notebooks if you like. Okay, so whenever you are studying for this topic, you can go through this table. Okay, so what I've done is I've tried to compile all the information into a tabular form for you guys to understand. Okay, so we come to sixth, which is the abducent. Okay, what we were talking about, it is a motor nerve. Okay, and it provides motor to lateral rectus that turns eye laterally. Okay, so that means it is participating in the movement of the eyeball. Okay, the lateral rectus muscle. Okay, so if abducent for some reason is injured, that means it will affect the movement of the eyeball. So that pretty much, of course, answers our question. So now this is the sixth. The seventh is facial. Again, it is motor as well as sensory, so it is a mixed nerve. Okay, and these are the functions. You can go through them. Again, yeah, this is also a part of the facial nerve. Okay, a function of the facial nerve. Then vestibulo, this is the, I'm sorry, this should have been eighth. Okay, this is not 4 lines here. Okay, this is the eighth, vestibulocochlear nerve, the vestibular part as well as the cochlear part. Okay, it is providing you with functions of both. Okay, vestibular part as well as the cochlear part, both of them are sensory in function, so it's a sensory nerve. Okay, then glossopharyngeal is the ninth nerve. Again, it's a motor to stylopharyngeus that assists with swallowing. Then it has motor function to the parotid gland. It has sensory functions to the tongue, the external ear, to the parotid gland, carotid body, and sinus, pharynx, and middle ear. So it has sensory as well as motor. Again, it's a mixed nerve. Vagus. Now, vagus nerve is very important. Okay, vagus nerve is very important. It is the 10th nerve. Please remember this. Okay, there are going to be many questions related to vagus nerve. Again, the motor functions are given here, and the sensory functions are given here. Okay, don't worry about special, general and somatic, motor, sensory. Don't worry about all that. Okay, so it is a mixed nerve. Now the reason why I've divided it like that, I've written it that way, is for, I guess maybe it would be helpful to you guys when you are studying it. So when you go through each and every nerve, you know exactly where and which part of the body is it affecting. Okay, that is why. Then you have the 11th, that is the spinal accessory nerve. Again, it's a motor nerve, it only has motor functions. And then you have the 12th nerve, hypoglossal nerve. Again, motor to muscles of tongue. I guess this is it. Yeah, okay, so we're going to question 2. Now before I, okay, sorry, this is behaving little crazy today. Let me go back to the question. Yeah, so in a man, abducens nerve is injured. Which one of the following functions will be affected? We already discussed that the lateral rectus muscle is affected, and so the movement of the eyeball will be affected, not the movement of tongue, swallowing, movement of neck. Okay, so you could get questions related to that. Or they could even ask you whether abducens is a sensory nerve or a motor nerve, or what is a number, or what number is a cranial nerve is it? Okay, the serial number 1, 2, 3, 4. So yeah, from NEET point of view, like I said, please remember the number, the name of the nerve, whether it's sensory or motor or mixed nerve, and of course the action. Okay, so clear. Let's move on. Okay, so question number 2. Injury to vagus nerve in humans is not likely to affect, and this appeared in 2004. So again, they have given you the name of the nerve and they asked you if it is not likely to affect or it's likely to affect. Okay, so you have A, tongue movements, B, gastrointestinal movements, C, pancreatic secretion, and D, cardiac movements. Okay, so vagus nerve in humans is not likely to affect tongue movements. Okay, so A, it affects gastrointestinal, pancreatic, and cardiac movements. Okay, so the answer is A. Again, for reference, go back to the table. Okay, so now you see how the table is very advantageous to study, because if you get questions like this, you can easily recall the table there and then go back. If you want, note it down in your notebook or whatever you use to study, and it will be easier for you. Okay, so injury to vagus nerve, for some reason if the vagus nerve is injured, it is not likely to affect the tongue movement. Okay, because that is not its job. Okay, let's go to the discussion. So vagus nerve provides parasympathetic innervation to smooth muscle of trachea, bronchi, digestive tract, and cardiac muscle of heart. Motor movements of tongue is controlled by the hypoglossal cranial nerve, which is cranial nerve 12. Okay, so tongue movement is affected by that. So clear? Okay, so this was about vagus nerve. Okay, so question number 3. Which cranial nerve has the highest number of branches? This appeared in 1999. So you have A, vagus nerve, B, trigeminal nerve, C, facial nerve, and D, none of these. It is clearly vagus nerve. Okay, this is a direct question. This is something that you should know, okay, that you should be aware of. Vagus nerve has the highest number of branches. Okay, let's go to the discussion. So vagus nerve has the highest number of branches. Actually, vagus comes from the term vagabond. Okay, means somebody who's a wanderer. Okay, so vagus nerve, the anatomy of vagus nerve is that it spreads all over the place. Okay, it's spread out all over the place, so they're wandering all over the place. So that is why it has lots of branches. It has lots of functions associated with it. Okay, so if that is helpful, you can learn it that way. Vagus comes from the word vagabond. Okay, which is somebody who's a wanderer, who just roams around from one place to another. Okay, so vagus nerve has the highest number of branches. If we go back to our question, yeah, so it's not facial nerve. Trigeminal nerve has 3 branches, which we saw, and of course D, none of these. So clearly it's A. All right, so question number 4. Sympathetic nervous system induces, this appeared in 1999. Okay, A, secretion of digestive juices, B, heartbeat, C, secretion of saliva, D, all of these. So now we need to know the function of the sympathetic nervous system on our organs. Okay, so sympathetic nervous system forms a part of the autonomous nervous system, right? So it induces heartbeat. Okay, it's B. Okay, so if you didn't know this answer, please go back and study the functions of the sympathetic nervous system on different organs. Okay, let's go to the discussion. So sympathetic system causes. So now I've again made another table, okay, where I have written the structures of the body and the corresponding effect of the sympathetic nervous system on that. Okay, so in the case of iris muscles, pupil gets dilated. Okay, and the iris muscles they relax. Blood vessels in head constricted. Okay, salivary glands secretion is inhibited. Okay, oral and nasal mucosa mucus secretion is inhibited. Skeletal blood vessels, they are dilated. Heart rate and force of contraction increased. Coronary arteries, they are dilated. Trachea and bronchi, slight vasoconstriction. It's not vasodilation, it is slight vasoconstriction. Usually I've seen in some textbooks where they write vasodilation, but this information is from the textbook of human anatomy by B.D. Chaurasia. Okay, he has stated slight vasoconstriction. It's a standard medical textbook that is studied by MBBS students. Okay, so in that he has mentioned trachea and bronchi. In the case of sympathetic system, it causes slight vasoconstriction. In the case of stomach, peristalsis is reduced and sphincters are closed. Okay. As we move on down, intestinal blood vessel vasoconstriction happens. Liver glycogen to glucose conversion is increased. This is very, very important to remember. Okay, this can be asked. Okay, glycogen to glucose conversion is increased in the case of sympathetic system. Spleen remains contracted. Adrenal medulla, adrenal and noradrenaline secretion is increased. Large and small intestine motility is reduced. Sphincters are closed. In kidney, urine secretion is decreased. In the case of bladder, wall is relaxed and sphincter closed. Sex organs and genitalia, blood vessels are constricted. Muscles attached to hair causes erection of hair. Okay, the erector pili muscle, it causes erection of hair. Sweat glands, also secretion is increased. Okay, so I've gone through this table. Please note it down in your books. Okay, so if we go back to our question, it induces what? Okay, so secretion of saliva, it does not induce, and secretion of digestive juices also, it does not induce. It induces the heartbeat. The heart rate increases in the case of sympathetic nervous system. Okay, the heart, yeah, rate and force of contraction is increased. Okay, so clear? All right, so yeah, clear. Okay, so this table has answered your question. So if you remembered this table, you should have been, to be able to answer this question shouldn't have been difficult for you. That is why I've made this into a table. I've compiled all the information that I have, and I have put it in a tabular form for you guys. Okay, so you can study it. Okay, next question, I guess we'll move on. Vagus nerve is the cranial nerve numbering. Okay, and appeared in 1997. So vagus nerve, the cranial nerve numbering. Okay, they basically it's a very weird question, but they basically want you to answer the corresponding number for that cranial nerve. And they're talking about vagus nerve. So vagus nerve is the 10th nerve. Please remember this. Okay, this is vagus nerve is a very favorite question. And because it has so many functions, it is a very important cranial nerve. Okay, so answer is C. Okay, so it is the 10th cranial nerve. Clear? Direct question, right? If you knew the table, the first table that I showed you, this is very easy then to answer. The vagus nerve is the 10th cranial nerve. That is why I gave the table in the beginning itself. So it's easy for you guys to answer. Okay, this was direct. We'll move on. Question number 6. By which nervous system and of what type the blood is supplied into visceral organs? Okay, this appeared in 1996. So you have A, both SNS and PNS involuntary. Now SNS and PNS are talking about sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system or neural system. Now it's called neural system. The name's been changed. B, parasympathetic nervous system involuntary. Sympathetic nervous system involuntary, sympathetic nervous system voluntary. So by which nervous system and of what type, that means whether it's voluntary or involuntary, the blood is supplied into visceral organs. Okay, that is the organs inside your body. So of course SNS and PNS both are involuntary, so you can obviously discard D. And if you go back and read the functions of sympathetic and parasympathetic, you notice that in sympathetic there are some cases where vasodilation or vasoconstriction occurs. Similarly for parasympathetic nervous system, okay, where vasodilation or vasoconstriction occurs. That means it is affecting the blood flow. Okay, so ideally the answer would be A. Of course, they are involuntary system, you're not controlling anything, and it's SNS and PNS. Let's go to the discussion. Okay, sympathetic and parasympathetic neural system, they constrict or dilate blood vessels of different organs. If you can go back and read the table that I showed you, sympathetic nervous system or neural system, you would understand how every organ is being affected in that situation. As we go down further in this presentation, I have also made another table for parasympathetic neural system. You can note that down also in your books, and so that will give you all the functions of the different organs in parasympathetic neural system. Okay, so they control the constriction or the dilation, okay, of the blood vessels, and so that affects the blood flow to different organs. Clear? Okay, so they are responsible for blood supply to visceral organs. All right, so clear. This was a little tricky. I would give it a smiley face, but provided you could have been able to answer this question, provided you understood SNS and PNS, the ANS system, very well. Okay, so this was a good question. Okay, let's move on. All right, question number 7. The sympathetic nerves in mammals arise from, and this appeared in 1995. So A, sacral nerves, B, 3rd, 7th, 9th and 10th cranial nerves, C, thoracolumbar nerves, D, cervical nerves. Okay, so the sympathetic nervous is thoracolumbar nerves. Okay, so they have a thoracolumbar outflow, okay, from the thoracic and the lumbar part of the spinal cord. So the answer is C. For this, you should have known the anatomy very well, okay, to be able to answer this question. Let's go to the discussion. So, the sympathetic nerves are known as the thoracolumbar outflow. Okay, if you didn't know, please remember this, because they arise from T1 to L2 segments of the spinal cord. So, when they write T, they are referring to thoracic. Okay, and L, lumbar. They write S, sacral. Okay, they write C, cervical. Okay, so we're talking about sympathetic system. They are they arise from the T1 to L2 segment of the spinal cord. Clear? This was again factual. Actually, there was not much to really deduce from. If you knew the anatomy very well, you should have been able to answer this question easily. Clear? Let's go back. Yes, sympathetic nerves, thoracolumbar nerves. I think I have mentioned, yes, I have also mentioned parasympathetic, I remember. Let me erase this part. Yeah, so parasympathetic nerves are also known as craniosacral outflow. Okay, so sympathetic are thoracolumbar, parasympathetic are craniosacral outflow because they arise from the brain. Okay, so in the brain, that is the 3rd, 7th, 9th and 10th cranial nerves and S2 to S4 segments of the spinal cord. Okay, so you have the brain over here and you have the spinal cord here. So they arise from the 3rd, 7th, 9th. That's why it's important to remember the anatomy. Okay, 3rd, 7th, 9th, 10th cranial nerve and also S2 to S4 part of the spinal cord. So this is where parasympathetic nerves arise from. Okay, again, this was an anatomy question. These are facts. Anatomy is just facts. You need to remember these facts. You need to remember the structure, how it is all arranged in the body, and you're good to go. Okay, so clear. Let's move on then. Okay, cranial and sacral part. It has cranial and sacral part. Okay, so question number 8. Afferent nerve fibers carry impulses from, this appeared in 1992. Okay, so afferent nerve fibers carry impulses from effector organs to CNS, B, receptors to CNS, CNS to receptors and CNS to muscles. So afferent nerve fibers They carry impulses from receptors to CNS. Very, very direct, very important. There in NCERT, please read. Okay. Answer is B. If you didn't know, that means you're in a fix. You need to go back and read this chapter again. Okay, this is a very basic question. You should have been able to answer this question easily. Let's go to the discussion. Okay, so afferent nerve fibers carry impulses from receptors to CNS. Efferent nerve fibers carry impulses from the CNS to the effector. So this is a diagram where they've given you sensory neuron. Now afferent is also known as sensory. Afferent, efferent. Please remember this. Don't get confused. This is a very basic system, okay? Very basic words that you need to know, okay, for the human body system, okay, to understand that. So afferent, efferent, sensory, motor, you should be able to know this, okay? So here you can see the impulses moving from the receptor. Let's say the skin, okay? It is going over here and it is going to the CNS, the spinal cord here, and you are getting the effect over here, the muscle. For example, you touch, a hot plate, and you quickly move your hand. That's your reflex. Okay, that's a reflex arc. Okay, you quickly move your hand away. So that means your muscles need to get the signal that, okay, this plate is hot, I need to move it away. Okay, so yeah, that's your afferent and the efferent. Okay, the difference between the two, and very basic, you need to know this. Okay, there are no excuses for not knowing. Okay, let's move on. So direct question here. Question number 9. Vagus nerve is, again vagus nerve, very favorite question. It's appeared in 1992. Vagus nerve is the 10th cranial nerve. Simple. Okay, again that's why I said it was important to study the table. Answer is A. Let's go to the discussion. Vagus nerve is the 10th cranial nerve. Okay, this is the fact. You need to know the table in order, all the nerves in order. Okay, and their corresponding functions and the type of nerve, whether it's a sensory, motor, or a mixed nerve. Okay, direct. Well, there's nothing really to explain here. Okay, so question number 10. One function of parasympathetic nervous system is, and this appeared in 1990, very old question. A. Contraction of hair muscles. B. Stimulation of sweat glands. C. Acceleration of heartbeat. D. Constriction of pupil. Okay, so one function is of the parasympathetic nervous of the neural system is B. Okay, constriction of pupil. Okay, the rest does not happen in parasympathetic. Let's go to the discussion. Yeah, so like I told you previously, I have made another table with all the functions, the structures, and the corresponding effect of stimulation. Okay, so when parasympathetic system is stimulated, what happens? What is the effect? So iris muscle pupil constriction, okay, happens. Like we already discussed, you go back to the question here. Yeah, constriction of pupil. Okay, lacrimal gland, that's your tear gland, tear secretion is increased. The saliva secretion is increased. These are all the salivary glands. Okay, and heart rate and force of contraction is decreased. Coronary arteries constricted. Trachea and bronchi constricted. Stomach, secretion of gastric juice and motility increased. Small intestine, digestion, absorption increased. Secretion of intestinal juice and motility increased. Okay, then liver and gallbladder, blood vessels dilated, secretion of bile increased. Pancreas, secretion of pancreatic juice increased, and salivary secretion is increased. Then kidney, I don't know why salivary secretion I've written here. Okay, I've already mentioned that. Kidney, urine secretion increased. Large intestine, secretion and motility increased. Sphincters relaxed. Bladder, muscle of wall contracted. Sphincters relaxed. Sex organs and genitalia, male is erection and female variable depending on stage and cycle. Muscles attached to hair causes hair to lie flat. Sweat glands decreases secretion. Okay, so if we go back to our question here. So contraction of hair muscle does not happen. Parasympathetic stimulation of sweat glands, no. Acceleration of heartbeat, no. So clearly it is constriction of pupil. So see how that table was very important. Okay, it was very valuable, because if you just knew the table, you should have, you could have answered this question very easily. Okay, so clear. Let's move on. Okay, so question number 11. Which of the following cranial nerves can regulate heartbeat? And this appeared in 1989, sorry. Again, another old question. Which of the following cranial nerves can regulate heartbeat? So you have 10, you have 9, you have 8, you have 7. So see, it was important for you to remember that table, because now they've only given you numbers, they've not given you any names. Okay, but cranial nerve that can regulate heartbeat is actually the 10th cranial nerve. Okay, that's vagus nerve. Okay, that can regulate the heartbeat. Okay, it has the parasympathetic innervation. Okay, so the answer is A. So also you see a trend here how they are asking a lot of questions related to vagus nerve, but that does not mean you ignore the other nerves. Okay, you need to remember anything can come at the end of the day. For till now, you've seen a lot of questions related to vagus nerve, because they've been asking you the which number that nerve is, or what is the function, or whether it can regulate heartbeat, all that kind of stuff. But that does not mean you ignore the other nerves. Okay, so let's go to the discussion. The 10th cranial nerve, that's the vagus nerve, controls the parasympathetic functions of the heart. Now, we've already seen the table and we've seen the parasympathetic functions on different organs of the body, and we also looked at heart. Now, a strong stimulation, and with a strong stimulation of the parasympathetic nervous system, it can even stop the heartbeat. It decreases the heartbeat, the heart rate. But if there's a very strong stimulation, it can even stop the heartbeat, but only for some time. Then again, it will escape that, okay, and come back to a heartbeat which is only 20 to 40 beats per minute. Okay, it becomes very slow, only 20 to 40 beats per minute, as long as the stimulation continues. And also it can also decrease the heart muscle contraction by 20 to 30%. Okay, so heartbeat, heart rate, they both have reduced. Now, vagal stimulation decrease the rate of heartbeat due to its position. Now, vagal, let me show you a diagram, because then you'll be able to understand this line. See, yeah. So you see the structure of the heart. You see the sympathetic system innervates the auricles as well as the ventricles, but vagal is only present in the auricle side. Okay, only in the top, the left and the right auricle. Okay, so they are mostly focused on controlling the heartbeat. Okay, that is why, because of that positioning, it has an added advantage of only decreasing the heartbeat at that position. Okay, since it innervates only the auricle side, it tends to only control the heartbeat. But in turn, when that is controlled, when heartbeat is controlled, that stimulation also decreases the muscle contraction of the ventricle and brings it down to 50%. Just an extra piece of information, just for you to understand how the vagus nerve actually works. From NEET point of view, don't worry about it. Just understand what vagus nerve does in its functions, and that it is associated with the parasympathetic nervous system. Okay, it is able to control that. Okay, so now because the vagus nerve is designed, or it's placed in such a way that it affects the heartbeat. Okay, it brings it down, and in turn it also controls then the ventricular pumping. Okay, brings it down to 50%. So that is how it is able to decrease the contraction and the heart rate. Okay, so this was just for you to understand. To answer a question, the question was quite direct. Okay, there was nothing really, they weren't asking how it does or what it does. It can regulate the heartbeat, yes. The 10th nerve can regulate the heartbeat. Of course, we have seen how it does, that is for your information. But to keep things simple, yes, of course, you can just remember that vagus nerve is responsible for that. But how it does is, how the whole function works, I've explained it to you. Alright, so let's move on. Okay, so question number 12. Nissls bodies are mainly composed of, and this appeared in NEET 2018, recent. A. Proteins and lipids. B. DNA and RNA. C. Nucleic acids and SER, that's smooth endoplasmic reticulum. And D. Free ribosomes and rough endoplasmic reticulum. Okay, so your answer should be D. Again, direct question, you should know this. This is there in NCERT. Please read NCERT. No excuses for that. Okay, let's go to discussion. So Nissl substance, let's understand Nissl substance. Okay, it's a granular material that stains with basic dyes. It is also called Nissl bodies or granules. Okay, so Nissl substance is also known as bodies or Nissl granules. Okay, now these bodies are composed of rough surface endoplasmic reticulum. Now, rough surface endoplasmic reticulum also contain ribosomes, of course, and they are responsible for high level of protein synthesis. Okay, they are responsible for high level of protein synthesis that takes place, which are needed for maintenance and repair, for production of neurotransmitters and enzymes. Okay, so these are the functions. Okay, and so Nissl substances are responsible for that. So this is a diagram of the cytone cell body. You can see the blue part here, which is this blue part here. These are the Nissl substances. Okay, dendrite. Now you notice that Nissl substances only remain over here. They don't go into the axon. Okay, they don't move there. You can see the axon is starting from here. You see the axon hillock here, and you see the axon here. Okay, this extends, that line extends. But Nissl granules will not be present over there. Please remember that. It could be a potential MCQ. Okay, so please remember, axons don't have Nissl granules. Okay, it's only present in this region only. Okay, so these are Nissl substances. Again, direct. Question number 12. Yeah. So Nissl's bodies are mainly composed of free ribosomes and rough endoplasmic reticulum. Of course, rough endoplasmic reticulum contains ribosome. There will be also some free ribosomes around that area. Okay, so then they're all responsible for high-level protein synthesis. Okay, clear? Let's move on. Let me just change this. Okay, question number 13. Myelin sheath is produced by, and you appear this question appeared in NEET 2017. A. Astrocytes and squamous cells. B. Oligodendrocytes and osteoclasts. C. Osteoclasts and astrocytes. Very big names. D. Squamous cells and oligodendrocytes. Okay, so myelin sheath is produced by D. Squamous cells and oligodendrocytes. Please again go back and read NCERT. No excuses for not being able to answer this question. Okay, so your answer is D. So myelin sheath is produced by squamous cells for neurons present in peripheral neural system. That's your cranial nerves and the spinal nerves. Okay, so squamous cells are responsible for producing the myelin sheath in the peripheral neural system. Oligodendrocytes produce myelin sheaths for neurons in central neural system, the CNS. Okay, so please remember the difference between the two. If they ask squamous cells, what is it responsible for? All those can come in the MCQ. Okay, and they're very direct questions. If you just knew the facts, it's very easy to answer such questions. Formation, I'll give you a little bit information how the myelin sheath is formed. Okay. Now what happens when the myelin sheath is formed, the squamous cells are present, okay, around the axon. So what happens, the axon invaginates into the cytoplasm of the squamous cell. Second is the axon is suspended. I'll show you a diagram because then it'll be easy for you to understand. Axon is suspended by a fold of the cell membrane of the squamous cell called mesaxon. Okay, so a structure called mesaxon is present at the end. Okay, and I'll tell you what mesaxon does. Now mesaxon, what it does, it becomes elongated and spirally wounds around the axon, forming several layers. The lipids are deposited between adjacent layers of the mesaxon and together they form the myelin sheath. I thought this was a good piece of information to share with you because now you know in your head how myelin sheath is formed. So maybe this answer would come easily to you, but we'll look at the diagram because the diagrams help you understand better. Schwann cells in sheaths only one axon. Oligodendrocytes provide myelin sheath to several axons. Okay, and the composition and structure of myelin sheath are different and vary in protein content. So the myelin sheath that's formed by oligodendrocytes is different from Schwann cells. Although yes, both of them are doing the same job, but they are different. They vary in the protein content. So damaged neurons within the CNS do not regenerate. Okay, so once they are damaged, they are damaged. So this is a diagram of the oligodendrocyte and it is forming a myelin sheath, okay, in the CNS. I'll show you another diagram. Yes, so this is what I was explaining to you. So yeah, you see over here, follow this, okay, red marker, axon lying over here, and this is the Schwann cell. Okay, now axon invaginates into the Schwann cell. This is the mesaxon that is formed at the end. This mesaxon tends to elongate. Okay, it will elongate. If you go to structure 4, it elongates and forms a spiral. That is how actually the myelin sheath is formed. Okay, it elongates and it wounds around the axon. So it keeps elongating and it keeps moving around and round and round and round and round. Okay, so that is how your myelin sheath is formed. So mesaxon makes several turns around the axon, okay, and the lipids that are deposited around. Okay, so at the end you have this neurilemma. The structure that is present outside is called the neurilemma, which contains the nucleus that is present outside the surface. So here you have seen a detailed description of how the myelin sheath is formed. Over here what you see is a 2D structure. Over here you can see the transverse section, okay, of how the myelin sheath is formed. First, see the axon invaginates into the Schwann cells and then it just goes round and round and round, finally forming the myelin sheath. Okay, so clear? I hope this was helpful for you guys. Now you know exactly how the myelin sheath is formed by the Schwann cells. Also, I've given a very important difference between the two, that myelin sheath, the Schwann cells in sheaths only one axon. Okay, Schwann cells will only form myelin sheath around one axon, while oligodendrocytes provide myelin sheath to several axons. Okay. Now if we go back to our question. Yeah. So myelin sheath is produced by Schwann cells and oligodendrocytes. This was clear. This was very direct. Okay. So but this was good information that you should remember. Okay, and I've also explained how myelin sheath is. Clear? Let's move on. Okay, so question number 14. Receptor sites for neurotransmitters are present on, this appeared in NEET 2017. Okay, again a recent question. A, presynaptic membrane, B, tips of axons, C, postsynaptic membrane, and D, membrane of synaptic vesicles. Okay, so we need to understand the receptor sites for neurotransmitters. They are present on the postsynaptic membrane. So your answer is C. So clearly over here we are talking about how the synapse is placed, okay, how it is structured. Let's go to the discussion. So receptor sites are present in the postsynaptic neurons. Okay, the neurotransmitters are released from the synaptic vessels. They enter the synaptic cleft and attach to the receptors in the postsynaptic neurons. I think I have a structure also for that. This results in generation of action potential, which results in depolarization. Okay, yes, so this is if you're familiar with NCERT, you know this diagram is taken from NCERT. Very, very important to read or understand or remember all structures in NCERT. Here you can see the presynaptic membrane, you know the synaptic cleft, and the postsynaptic membrane. Okay, so you see the receptors here, clearly it is mentioned here, the receptors here. Okay, so this was a direct question. if you knew your theory well, this was appeared in NEET 2017. Okay, so it's pretty recent. Receptor sites for neurotransmitters are present in the postsynaptic membrane. Okay, clear? Direct question, direct answer. Simple. Question number 15. The most abundant intracellular cation is, it's appeared in NEET 2013. A, H plus, B, potassium, C, sodium, or D, calcium. Abundant intracellular cation. Okay, intracellular means inside the cell. Okay, and that is B, potassium. Answer is B. Let's go to the discussion. Yeah, so I made a table here. You can see these are the cations and this is the concentrations intracellular. I forgot to mention that, but yeah, we're talking about intracellular. So clearly you can see potassium is the highest in the whole group. Okay, and amongst the cations. So again, direct question. Yeah, easy. Let's move on. Okay, question number 16. A diagram showing axon terminal and synapse is given. Identify correctly at least two of A to D. This appeared in NEET 2013. So this diagram isn't very clear, but we'll do our best. So you have A, which looks like the receptor site over here, but they've said A is neurotransmitter, which is incorrect. Yes, A is receptor. So we have one here. Yeah, B, which is the synaptic cleft. Yeah, B, but A is wrong here in the A option. You have C, which look like synaptic vesicles. Yes, C, synaptic vesicles. And D either could be presynaptic membrane or it could be calcium. Okay, one of them. So, but clearly over here answer is C. If you like, you can pause the video, think about it, and then come back. But the answer is C here, because if you have A, receptor here, and you have C, synaptic vesicles. Okay, so that clearly answers our question. Let's go to the discussion. So A is the receptor, okay, in the postsynapse on which the neurotransmitter attaches to. B is the synaptic cleft. C is the synaptic vesicles in which the neurotransmitter is stored. D represents calcium ions. Calcium ions also play an important role. Okay, they are also calcium voltage gated channels which then attach to the release sites, and these release sites then they stimulate the synaptic vesicles to release the neurotransmitter. Okay, so yeah, if one of the options did say calcium there, so we can assume that D is calcium, although it's not very clear. Okay, and calcium is usually, yeah, it's of course it's present in the presynaptic region. So clear? Clearly, of course, our answer was C. So let's move on then. Okay, another diagram. Question number 17. The figure shows an axon terminal and synapse. Select the option giving correct identification of labels A to D. This appeared in Karnataka NEET 2013. So you have A, action potential. C, neurotransmitter. No, doesn't seem like it. B, neurotransmitter. Yes. D, receptor capsules. No. C, receptor. Yes. And D, synaptic vesicles. Yes. C seems to be the right answer. A, axon terminal, and B, serotonin complex. Doesn't really fit the description. So answer looks like, yeah, it's C, of course. So C is receptor here, and D is the synaptic vesicle. Okay, let's go to the discussion. So A is the axon, as was the axon there. B is the neurotransmitter, C is the receptor, and D is the synaptic vesicle. Okay, so the answer was C over there, option C. If you go back, yeah, receptor and synaptic vesicles. Okay, let's move on then. Alright, question number 18. When a neuron is in resting state, that is not conducting any impulse, the axonal membrane is. This appeared in 2011. So we are talking about resting state. Okay. A. Comparatively more permeable to sodium ions and nearly impermeable to potassium ions. Equally permeable to both sodium and potassium ions. C. Impermeable to both sodium and potassium ions. D. Comparatively more permeable to potassium ions and nearly impermeable to sodium ions. So when a neuron is in resting state, it is more permeable to potassium ions and nearly impermeable to sodium ions. Okay, you remember the resting state potential is minus 90 millivolts. Okay, before the action potential is generated, and at that time the nerve or the neuron fiber, it is more permeable to potassium ions than sodium ions. Okay, so your answer is D. Okay, let's go to the discussion. Okay, now there are two things or two characters in the story that contribute to the minus 90 millivolts. Okay, now we know, we've answered the question. Yeah, we know that it is more permeable to potassium and not so much as permeable to sodium ions. Okay, but we need to understand how did we reach to minus 90 millivolts. Okay, why is it minus 90 millivolts? What is contributing to that? Okay, so now there are two characters in this story. You have the presence of potassium and sodium ion leak channels. Okay, there are some leak channels that are present on the neuron, as well as the sodium potassium ATPase pump. Okay, sodium potassium ATPase pump, you already know how that works. Okay, I've explained this a million times. You can also go back to my the excretory system, also I've explained it a million times. It plays a very important role in our body. Okay, so there are two. There are ion leak channels, sodium potassium ion leak channels, as well as sodium potassium ATPase pump. Okay, and they contribute to the formation of minus 90 millivolts. Okay, which is the resting membrane potential. Now, let's say we are only looking at potassium. We have a nerve fiber. Okay, we have the channel here. Okay, and we are only looking at potassium. Oh, sorry. Hypothetically, we are only looking at potassium as if only potassium is moving in. Okay, or rather out. Okay, the movement of potassium ions from inside to outside, okay, it creates a negative potential, which is a difference of minus 94 millivolts. Okay, now that means the potential difference is 94 millivolts and it is more negative inside as potassium is moving out. Okay, potassium moves out. There's a lot of potassium inside, it is moving out. Okay, this is resting membrane potential. Okay, and we are only looking at potassium. Let's say hypothetically we are only looking at potassium, no other ion. We're not talking about sodium at all. Okay, we'll come to that later. Okay, potassium is moving out. Okay, it is creating a potential difference of 94 millivolts and it is more negative inside now. As potassium is moving out, it creates a more negative environment inside. So as per calculation, now this has been done experimentally. How were we reached minus 94 millivolts? It has been done experimentally. It is said that you get a potential difference of minus 94 millivolts. Alright, let's accept that. Fine. Now, we have spoken about potassium. Let's talk about sodium. Now say, if there's a nerve fiber and we're only talking about sodium. Okay, potassium moving out. Now what? Let's say if only sodium is moving in. Sodium ions are only moving inside. Okay, that time a potential difference of 61 millivolts is created and it is more positive inside. Clearly sodium keeps moving in, potassium is not leaving out. We're only talking about sodium. Okay, it creates a potential difference of 61 millivolts, which is more positive inside. Obviously, this again, the 61 millivolts has been done experimentally in a lab. Okay, they have done this multiple times to get that number. Okay, this experiment has been done multiple times to get that plus 61 millivolts and minus 94 millivolts. It has been experimentally done. Okay, that's how they reached minus 90 millivolts, which you will come later. Okay, potassium is moving, when we spoke about potassium moving out, only potassium moving out, okay, only one ion, it is creating a minus 94 millivolts in the nerve fiber. When only sodium is moving in, it creates a plus 61 millivolts potential difference. Okay, now so we're only halfway through the story. Now you're wondering, what's my point? I will tell you what my point is in some time. Now, these values were calculated using Nernst equation. Now go back and speak to your chemistry teacher. What is Nernst equation? You study this in chemistry, I'm sure, right? These values, this plus, minus 94 and plus 61 millivolts for potassium and sodium, were calculated using Nernst equation. Okay, now Nernst equation only applies for a single cation. It doesn't do it for multiple. Okay, and it is only based on the concentration inside and outside the nerve fiber of that particular cation. For individual, that means only sodium we took, we calculated inside and outside concentrations, and then we got the answer. Similarly, for potassium, we did the same thing. But we are only doing individual cations, which is not our goal. Okay, we need to find out when potassium and sodium both are applied at the same time, what is the result. So another equation exists in science called Goldman equation. Don't worry what the equations are. Don't worry about that. Now what that Goldman equation does is, now this person who derived the equation, he or she, they have incorporated permeability also. Okay, in the Goldman equation, you can use multiple cations to calculate the answer, as well as the permeability. How much permeable is sodium? How much permeability is there of potassium? In Nernst equation, we're not even taking that into account. We're only looking at concentrations. And we apply that into the formula and we got some answer. But that is not really answering our goal, or helping us achieve our goal, right? So we are looking at Goldman equation now, and Goldman equation is designed in such a way, derived in such a way, that they are taking permeability into account, all right, as well as you can calculate multiple cations together, or ions together rather. Even chloride is involved in this, but we are not looking so much at chloride because it is a very small value. Okay, so we are only looking at sodium and potassium. Okay, so when Goldman equation system was applied, they took permeability into account and they got the answer. Now what the answer was, this summated the potential as minus 86 millivolts. Now that what minus 86 millivolts results in, it includes sodium as well as potassium, and including their permeability also. Along with the concentration, yes, we want inside and outside concentration of both these ions, as well as permeability of that particular ion. Okay, now if you notice, minus 86 millivolts is closer to minus 94 millivolts. Correct? That means it is closer to, what does that mean? That means it is more permeable to potassium. That means potassium has a very deep and profound effect on that as compared to sodium. Sodium was creating a more positive potential difference, whereas potassium creates a more negative potential difference, movement of potassium from inside to outside. Okay, so this shows that potassium plays a very important role in the resting nerve fiber. We only talk about resting, action potential is not even generated, only resting nerve fiber. That means potassium, since this minus 86 millivolts is very close to the value of minus 94 millivolts as compared to plus 61 millivolts. Obviously, that means potassium is creating a very deep and profound effect. And this has all been done experimentally, mind you. Okay, these values. So, now we've reached minus 86 millivolts using Goldman equation. Now, sodium potassium ATPase pump also contributes. It contributes minus 4 millivolts. We've got minus 86 millivolts, fine. Now, so where does the minus 4 come in? To add up to minus 90, right? We've already reached 86, we need minus 4 more to add up to minus 90 millivolts. This sodium potassium ATPase pump comes in and they contribute minus 4 millivolts. Okay, and they maintain that electronegative environment inside the nerve fiber. Alright, so It has been experimentally found that permeability of potassium ions is found to be 100 times more permeable than sodium ions. Clearly we can see from the values itself. Okay, so potassium plays a very important role during the resting nerve fiber. It is more, that means the nerve fiber, it has been proved now that the permeability of potassium ions is more than the sodium ions in the resting nerve fiber. So minus 86 millivolts from the Goldman equation that has been calculated, and minus 4 millivolts, sorry, from the sodium potassium ATPase pump adds up to minus 90 millivolts. That's how you got minus 90 millivolts. Okay, it's very easy. We learn it in theory. Oh, it's only minus 90 millivolts. Forget about it. But how did we come to that? This is how it was done. It was done experimentally in a lab, and they have found this answer. Okay, that it is minus 90 millivolts of a resting nerve potential. How that happens? Yes, we have seen that. So a little bit of mathematical equations involved in this, but like I said, this is all extra piece of information. Theory, you just need to remember that it is more permeable to potassium ions than sodium ions. If you go back, yeah, so this is an equation. One second, this misses the sodium line here. See, now you see potassium is moving out, right? But sodium is also moving in. I guess they forgot to put that line here. The sodium is moving in. So there are potassium leak channels here. Okay, this is a sodium potassium ATP pump. Okay, so this contributes minus 86 millivolts according to the Goldman equation, and this is minus 4 millivolts. And that's how you got minus 90 millivolts. And this is all extra. This is not for NEET, but I felt like discussing it with you guys so that you understand how they have got minus 90 millivolts. Okay, now if you remember, if you understand this experiment, it will be like stuck in your head. The resting membrane potential is minus 90 millivolts, and at that time the nerve fiber is more permeable to potassium than sodium. It's not that sodium is zero, it's not permeable at all. Yes, there is some sodium also more coming in, but it is more permeable to potassium than compared to sodium. Okay, so let's go back to our question. So when a neuron is in resting state, okay, that is not conducting any impulse, the axonal membrane is comparatively more permeable to potassium ions and nearly impermeable, not completely impermeable, okay, to sodium ions. Okay, so that is the appropriate answer to this question. Okay, good question. Yeah, but yeah, at the end they're not really asking you anything about how minus 90 millivolts was achieved, but you need to know the theory, right? So clear. I hope this was clear and it was interesting for you guys to study. Okay, I guess we've come to the end of this video lecture, and I hope you've enjoyed today's video lecture, and I hope you learned something new today. And I'm available on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. The links will be there in the description box below. And don't forget to like, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to MJ NEET Biology for more content. Okay, and I'll see you in the next video lecture. All right, so bye.